She outbid him at an auction. The problem? 24 hours earlier, he'd fired her for defending herself against a powerful man. She was a waitress, or so he thought. This is the story of a billionaire who thought he knew everything, and the waitress who proved him wrong about all of it, starting with who she really was. The chandeliers above Sotheby's auction hall threw golden light across 300 faces, but Sebastian Knight only saw one. The auctioneer's voice cut through the silence. $100 million. Going once? Going twice? A woman's voice, clear and cold. 110 million. Every head turned, and Sebastian's hand froze midair. He turned slowly, already knowing what he'd see, but unable to believe it. Her, the waitress from yesterday, the one he'd fired, the one security had escorted out while she'd held his gaze, without flinching, now sat 3 rows back, in a champagne gold gown that caught the light like liquid fire, diamonds at her throat and ears. Her hair swept up to reveal a neck he'd never seen before, because she'd always worn it down, hidden under that uniform. And her expression. God, that expression. Confidence, ice, victory. His chest tightened, not with anger, but with something far more dangerous. A cocktail of shock and confusion, and the smallest flicker of relief, because he'd tried to find her after that night. Had his team search for days, only to discover she'd vanished without a trace. And now here she was. Who the hell is she? Arya turned her head with deliberate slowness, and when her eyes met his, she smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. "Sold," the auctioneer announced, his gavel cracking like a gunshot. "To the lady in gold." Applause rippled through the crowd, but Sebastian couldn't move, as she rose from her seat with the grace of someone who'd been doing this her entire life. And she walked past him, close enough that her perfume hit him like a memory he couldn't place. Jasmine and something darker. And she leaned in, her lips almost brushing his ear. "You should have asked my name," she whispered, "before you threw me out." Then she was gone. Sebastian sat frozen in his chair. Her name. 8 months she'd worked in his hotel, and he'd never once asked her name. Had kept that distance because asking felt like crossing a line, felt like admitting he'd noticed her every time she'd walked into a room. And now she'd just spent $110 million to make sure he'd never forget her. The question wasn't who she was. The question was, what the hell she wanted. And why did it feel like he'd just lost more than an auction? 8 months ago, Sebastian walked past the HR conference room and stopped. Through the glass door, a woman sat across from his hiring manager, her posture too perfect, her hands folded in her lap. "High school diploma," the manager said, tapping her resume. "But 3 years in service industry?" "Yes," the woman replied. No hesitation, no apology. Sebastian's eyes narrowed. Something about her didn't fit: the way she held eye contact, the way she spoke without filler words, the way she existed in that chair, like she owned it. But his hotel didn't discriminate, and if she could do the job, the rest didn't matter. The manager stamped her file. "Welcome to Night Hotel, Arya." Arya. Sebastian walked away and forgot her by the time he reached his office. 3 months ago, the restaurant hummed with low conversation and clinking silverware, and Sebastian wasn't even looking up from the documents in front of him until the man across from him grimaced. "This wine is corked." Before Sebastian could signal the sommelier, the waitress appeared, lifted the bottle, and inhaled once. "You're right, sir," she said without missing a beat. "This batch went bad in storage. Let me bring you the 2015 vintage instead. It pairs better with your ribeye anyway." Sebastian stared. The sommelier didn't even know that. When the meeting ended, he caught her by the bar. "Excuse me." She turned toward him, and as she did, his eyes dropped to her name tag. She blinked, something flickering in her eyes. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. "How did you know about the 2015? "I read the wine menu, Mr. Knight." Sebastian angled his head slightly. watching her with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. Most people don't memorize pairing notes. I'm not most people. 3 seconds passed, her gaze holding steady, heat crawling up his neck as he felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with power. Good work. Keep it up. He left before she could respond. Behind him, Arya smiled. 1 month ago, 2 a.m. and the city stretched below him in a grid of lights, and Sebastian gripped the rooftop railing hard because his father's voice still echoed in his skull. Weak, disappointing, not worthy of the knight name. Something brushed the quiet behind him, enough to pull him around. Arya stood 10 feet away, still in her uniform, her shift clearly over, and her eyes widened. Mr. Knight, I didn't know anyone was up here. You're still here? Just finished, she said, stepping closer. Are you okay? He heard it then she dropped the formal tone, speaking to him like he was a person instead of a title. Do I look okay? No, she said simply. You look like someone carrying the weight of a building. His breath caught because that was exactly it. Exactly what no one else had ever seen. Can I tell you something, Mr. Knight? Sebastian, he said before he could stop himself. When it's just us, call me Sebastian. Her lips parted, just slightly, and he watched her pulse jump at her throat. Sebastian, she said softly. Successful people always look lonely, because no one asks them what they actually want. Everyone just takes. You think I'm lonely? I think you're surrounded by people who want something from you, but no one asks what you need. Silence stretched between them, charged and close. The city lights caught in her eyes, and she was nearer than he'd ever let her be, near enough to make something in him lean forward before he could stop it. He wanted to close that last inch. Wanted things no employer should want from someone who worked for him. Not if rules and consequences meant anything. What I want, the words slipped out. His hand lifted, almost on instinct. She didn't move. For a breath, it felt possible. Then reality hit, all the reasons he couldn't cross that line. He stepped back like the distance was a lifeline. You should go home, it's late. The warmth in her expression died. Yes, Mr. Knight. She walked off, and he gripped the railing again. Shame sinking deep in his chest for wanting what he shouldn't. 2 weeks ago, at 8 p.m., in the VIP room, Arya refilled the wine glass and stepped back, but the man's hand caught her wrist before she could retreat. Pretty little thing, Marcus Wolfe said, his grip tightening. What's your name? She pulled free, her tray steady despite the revulsion crawling up her spine. Sir, please don't touch me. Marcus laughed, the sound thick and entitled. Oh, feisty. I like that. His hand slid to her hip this time, fingers digging in, and something snapped inside her chest. The bottle left her hand before thought could stop it. Red wine exploding across his face and his $2,000 shirt. Sebastian walked beside his father, their footsteps echoing off marble. Marcus announces the reinvestment decision tomorrow, Harrison said without looking at him. Do not let anything upset him tonight. I know, Dad. A scream cut through the air, sharp and furious. They exchanged a quick glance toward the sound, and their feet were already moving, fast and certain, down the hall. The door slammed open. Marcus stood dripping wine, his face purple with rage, and Arya held the empty bottle like a weapon, her chest heaving. This bitch threw wine at me, Marcus roared. I'm calling the police. Sebastian's father moved forward, his hand already raised. How dare you? Wait, Sebastian cut in, stepping between them. What happened here? Arya's eyes locked on his, desperate and pleading in a way that made his ribs tighten. He touched me, she said, her voice cracking. I asked him to stop. He didn't. Sebastian turned to Marcus. Is that true? Marcus scoffed, adjusting his ruined collar. She's lying. I was being friendly. You know how these girls are. Sebastian looked back at Arya. Her eyes were the same ones from the rooftop, the ones that had seen through him when no one else bothered to look. And he knew that she was telling the truth. But Marcus owned 30% of this hotel. Marcus had the power to pull funding, to collapse everything, to put thousands of employees on the street. His father leaned close, his breath hot against Sebastian's ear. "Get rid of her, now, or we lose everything." Sebastian's hands curled into fists. He looked at Arya, saw the tear sliding down her cheek, saw her believing he might actually choose her, and he hated himself. "Arya," he said slowly, each word scraping his throat raw, "I need you to leave." Her face went blank. "What?" "You're fired," he forced out, effective immediately. "You don't believe me?" He turned his head because he couldn't look at her, couldn't let her see what this was doing to him. "It doesn't matter what I believe." Security. 2 guards appeared in the doorway. Arya's voice came out small and broken. "I thought you were different." "You were wrong." The guards took her arms, and she didn't fight, just let them lead her away while her eyes stayed on him until the door closed and cut her from view. Silence filled the room. "Good," Marcus said, straightening his tie. "Now let's talk about that investment. Get out." Marcus blinked. "What?" Sebastian turned, his voice dropping to something cold and final. "I said get out of my hotel. You're banned, permanently." Marcus laughed, the sound ugly. "You can't be serious, your father." "Dad," Sebastian said without looking away from Marcus. "He goes. Now." His father's voice rose in disbelief. "Sebastian, the investment. I don't care." "You'll regret this, boy." Marcus spat, already backing toward the door. He left, and the room seemed to shrink. Sebastian's father moved fast, his palm cracking across Sebastian's face hard enough to snap his head sideways. "Do you know what you just did? We needed that money." Sebastian touched his cheek, the sting grounding him. "Then you should have chosen better partners. You just destroyed this company for a waitress." "No," Sebastian said quietly. "I protected her from a predator, something you never did for anyone." His father's lip curled. "You're weak, just like your mother." He stormed out, leaving Sebastian alone in a room that still smelled like spilled wine and burned bridges. Sebastian braced a hand against the table, breath unsteady. He'd saved her. He'd thrown out Marcus. But she'd never know he'd fired her to protect her, or just how easily Marcus could have ruined her life if he'd wanted to. Being the villain she walked away from was the safer choice. Better her anger than Marcus's attention. He let out a shaky breath. "Arya," he whispered into the empty room. "I'm sorry." Sebastian sat in the dark, the city lights below doing nothing to touch the shadows in his office. He picked up his phone. "Legal teams start an investigation into Marcus Wolf. Past harassment allegations. Anything you can find. And do it quietly." He ended the call and dialed again. "HR, the woman on today's termination. Arya. What's her last name?" On the other end, rapid keyboard clicks. Then silence. "There isn't one in our system, sir. Just Arya." "What? How is that?" He stopped, ice sliding through his veins. "Find her. Give her a year's severance. Do it quietly. But company policy." "I don't care about policy. Just do it." He ended the call and drifted toward the window. She had no last name, no background they could trace. Like she'd stepped into his world out of nowhere and disappeared just as quietly. But her eyes, those had stayed with him, clear and steady in a place built on pretense. And he'd thrown her out anyway. And now she was right in front of him again. Sebastian moved through the crowd as Arya reached the marble staircase, and he stepped into her path before she could descend. She stopped, her eyes lifting to meet his. They stood close, closer than strangers should, and neither moved. "Wait." Arya's expression stayed cool, unreadable. "For what?" He searched her face, trying to reconcile the woman in front of him with the waitress he'd fired. The contradiction so sharp, it felt unreal. You vanished. No last name, no records. My team couldn't find anything. Maybe you weren't supposed to. Who are you? She tilted her head slightly, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. Does it matter now? Yes. The word came out harder than he intended, and something flickered in her eyes before disappearing. You fired me, she said simply. That's all you need to remember. I fired you because Marcus Wolf would have destroyed you if I hadn't. Her shoulder shifted, the smallest flinch. So you made the choice for me. I made the choice that kept you alive. They stood locked in place, tension coiling between them until she was the one to break it. Monday, 9 a.m., shareholder meeting. You'll get your answers then. She stepped around him, her gown brushing his sleeve, and headed for the exit. Sebastian watched her go, his jaw tight, everything in him screaming to follow, to demand more, to... He stayed where he was. Outside, rain had started falling, and through the glass doors he saw her reach a Rolls-Royce, its door already open. She paused before getting in, her hand on the frame, and turned back. Their eyes met across the distance. She just looked at him like she was memorizing something she'd need later. Sebastian stood in the empty lobby, rain streaking down the windows, and pulled out his phone. I need everything on a woman named Aria, he said when his head of security answered. No last name. Worked at the hotel until yesterday. Find out who she really is. He hung up and stared at the wet streets outside. He'd find out what she wanted. But standing alone in the silence, he couldn't shake the weight in his chest that felt uncomfortably like loss. Sebastian's office, 4 a.m., and the city below still slept while he stared at the screen. Aria Castellano, MIT doctorate in business ethics. Thesis title, Corporate Ethics and Undercover Investigation. 15% shareholder in Knight Industries. Acquired over 3 years through shell companies and offshore accounts. He scrolled down. An old news article loaded, its headline stark in black and white. Castellano heiress vanishes after father's suicide. Family business destroyed by corporate cover-up. The photo showed a girl, 15 years old, standing at a funeral in a black dress, her eyes hollow. Sebastian leaned back, the pieces clicking into place with brutal clarity. Her father had been destroyed the same way his company destroyed people now. Crushed under the weight of secrets and silence, and men who valued profit over lives. Another document open, her thesis abstract. The only way to truly understand systemic abuse is to experience it from the bottom. 8 months. She'd endured 8 months of harassment and humiliation and contempt, collecting evidence while he'd walked past her 100 times without seeing. And on the last night, when she'd finally been hurt, he'd fired her. He'd become the system that killed her father. Sebastian closed the laptop and sat in the dark, the truth settling over him like ash. Monday's meeting wouldn't be a negotiation. It would be a reckoning. The boardroom held 80 chairs, and every one was filled. Sebastian sat at the head table beside his father, the weight of 50 executive stares pressing down on them both. When the double doors opened, Aria walked in, navy suit, hair pulled back, heels clicking against marble, and she moved like she owned the room. Because, Sebastian realized with cold clarity, she did. Good morning. My name is Aria Castellano. I own 15% of this company. The room erupted in whispers. His father's hand gripped the armrest, knuckles white. Castellano, his father breathed. Victor Castellano's daughter. Sebastian turned. You knew her father? His father didn't answer. Aria stepped to the podium, and the screen behind her lit up with a photograph, 20 years old, showing 2 men shaking hands. 20 years ago, she said, my father ran Castellano Manufacturing, your biggest supplier. When safety violations were discovered in your factories, your executives told him to bury the evidence. The photo changed. A contract cancellation notice stamped in red. He refused, so you destroyed him, canceled every contract, blacklisted his name. Within a year, he was bankrupt. Within 2 years, he was dead. Silence, absolute and suffocating. I was 15, Arya continued, her voice never wavering. I swore I'd find out why. So I bought your stock, piece by piece, for 3 years. Then I came here to see it myself. The screen shifted to video footage, grainy surveillance angles showing conference rooms and hallways, executives laughing about harassment complaints, a manager instructing someone to delete files, Sebastian's father on a phone call. Keep it quiet. We can't afford another scandal. The room shifted, people leaning forward or pulling back, and Sebastian froze, the truth settling heavier than he'd expected. 2 days ago, Arya said, I was assaulted by one of your investors. When I defended myself, I was fired. She looked directly at Sebastian. By Sebastian Knight. A ripple moved through the room. Someone's head turned. Another squeezed their eyes shut, and someone else let out a long, shaken breath. Sebastian sat still, Arya's words landing with a weight he knew he deserved. Harrison's fist slammed onto the table, the sound cracking through the silence. This is slander, Harrison announced. We have policies in place. This woman... That's enough, Sebastian cut in, standing. Harrison turned, fury flashing across his face. Sit down. Sebastian didn't move. She's telling the truth, he said. I fired her. Harrison's breath came harsh and uneven, rage barely contained. Don't, he said, each word scraping out. Don't say another word. Sebastian stepped away from the table and walked toward Arya, the distance between them closing until he stood at the base of the podium. He lifted his eyes to hers. What do you want? Arya straightened, her hands flat on the surface. An independent investigation. Every employee who's been silenced will have the chance to testify. Every policy that enabled this will be rewritten. And anyone who tries to stop it will be removed from their position. Sebastian nodded once. You'll have it. Harrison shot to his feet, his palm cracking against the table. You're going to destroy this company. Everything I built was built on silence. Sebastian cut in, turning to face him. On people too afraid to speak. He looked past his father to the executives, and most of them dropped their eyes. The air in the room pressed down, heavy and still, and we all pretended it was easier that way, didn't we? So let's stop pretending we haven't hit the bottom, because from where I'm standing, it feels like we're already there. And that responsibility is mine, Sebastian said, for choosing comfort over truth. He turned back to Arya. You'll have my full cooperation. Harrison moved around the table, closing the distance between them, and Sebastian could feel the heat of his father's anger radiating across the space. You're tearing this empire apart. Harrison's voice hardened. Just like your mother. She couldn't handle the pressure either. And you're proving she wasn't the only weakness in this family. Sebastian's jaw locked, his hands curling into fists at his sides. But he held his ground. Maybe I am weak, he said, his voice quiet but steady. But at least I'll be able to look at myself. Harrison stared at him, something fracturing behind his expression. Then he turned sharply and walked toward the exit, his shoes striking the floor in rapid, angry beats. The door slammed hard enough to rattle the frame. Silence flooded back in. Sebastian let out a slow, steady breath, then turned back to the room. I spent my whole life protecting this company's reputation, he said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his chest. I didn't realize I was protecting the wrong thing. He looked at Arya, and something passed between them, fragile and electric. I'm choosing the right side now. Arya's expression didn't change, but her fingers released their grip on the podium, just slightly. The executives began to move. Chairs scraped back. 4 men in the front row stood and walked out, their faces tight with anger or fear. 3 more followed. Then 2. The exodus slowed. Sebastian watched them go, counting each departure like a loss he'd earned. When the movement stopped, 9 executives remained. One of them, an older woman Sebastian had known for years, met his eyes and nodded once, her mouth pressed into a thin line. Shame, maybe, or recognition. Sebastian couldn't tell, but she stayed in her seat. Arya gathered her notes, her movements precise and controlled. The independent investigation begins immediately, she said. Anyone with information can reach out through the new confidential hotline. The number will be distributed by end of day. She looked up, scanning the remaining faces. This meeting is over. People stood slowly, some whispering, some silent, filing out in clusters that broke apart in the hallway. Everyone except Sebastian and Arya. The door closed behind the last executive, leaving them alone in a space that still smelled like fear and expensive cologne. Sebastian stepped closer, stopping 3 feet away. So what are you expecting from me now? Arya's hand paused on the clasp. Now we see if your choice today was about doing what's right or about easing your guilt. She lifted her eyes then, and the look she gave him left him painfully aware of himself. I'll know the difference. She walked past him, her shoulder almost brushing his, and left. Sebastian stood alone in the empty boardroom, staring at the screen that still showed his father's frozen face mid-conversation, evidence of everything he'd tried not to see. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent to the fractures forming inside this building, and Sebastian remained in the quiet that followed, waiting for whatever came next. Arya's penthouse overlooked the same city from a different angle, glass walls framing the skyline in clean, sharp lines. She set her tablet down, the news headline still glowing on the screen. Knight Industries in crisis after shocking shareholder meeting. 3 years of planning. 8 months undercover. And it had worked. She stood at the window, her reflection ghosting over the city lights, and replayed the moment Sebastian had stood in that boardroom, his father's fury crashing over him while he'd held his ground. She'd expected him to defend himself, maybe deflect, maybe even lie. She hadn't expected him to choose her side. The memory unsettled her in a way victory shouldn't, because the man who'd fired her and the man who'd stood beside her today didn't match. And somewhere between those 2 versions was someone she hadn't fully seen yet. Maybe working alongside someone only showed you what they wanted you to see. Maybe there was more underneath. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A message from the legal team. Investigation briefing in 3 days. 9 a.m. Your presence requested. Sebastian Knight will be attending. Arya stared at the words, something tightening in her chest that felt uncomfortably close to anticipation. She set the phone down and turned back to the window. Soon, she'd find out if today's choice was real or just another performance. 3 days later, the conference room sat in early morning quiet. 1 chair already occupied, a lone coffee cooling beside a stack of neatly arranged papers. The door opened, and Sebastian stepped in with a box under his arm, shadows under his eyes like he hadn't slept since the shareholder meeting. He stopped when he saw her. Morning. Morning, Arya said back. The air between them stretched tight and unfamiliar, neither quite sure what they were to each other now. Not enemies anymore, but not quite allies either. Sebastian set the box on the table and started pulling out documents, internal memos, and emails his father had kept locked in a private server. I got access to these last night, he said without looking at her. My father's correspondence going back 15 years. Most of it's redacted, but legal thinks they can recover the originals. Arya moved closer, her eyes scanning the papers as he spread them across the table. This one, she said, pointing to a memo dated 8 years ago. That's the Henderson case. A warehouse manager reported unsafe conditions and was fired 2 weeks later. The official record says he quit. Sebastian pulled the document toward him, reading. There's an email thread here, he said slowly. My father telling HR to make it go away quietly. He offered the manager $50,000 to sign an NDA. Did he take it? No, Sebastian said. He tried to sue. The case was settled out of court for twice that amount and buried. Aria picked up another file, this one with a name she recognized. Maria Valdez. She worked in housekeeping. Reported sexual harassment from a guest. Your father had her transferred to the graveyard shift and cut her hours until she quit. Sebastian felt the blood drained from his body. How many cases like this are there? Enough to show how long this has been happening, she said, her voice flat and matter-of-fact. Long enough for it to become the culture here. They worked in silence for the next hour, pulling documents, cross-referencing names, building timelines that showed a pattern too deliberate to be coincidence. Sebastian paused, holding a photograph that had been tucked into one of the files. A company event from 5 years ago. Executive smiling for the camera. I was there, he said, his voice tight. I remember this dinner. I gave a speech about company values and integrity. He set the photo down. And the whole time, this was happening right underneath me. Aria watched him, the way his hands pressed flat against the table, like he needed something solid to hold on to. You didn't know, she said. I should have. Knowing and seeing are different things. Sebastian looked up, and their eyes met across the table. You saw it, he said. You were there for 8 months, and you saw everything I missed. Because I was looking, Aria replied. You were taught not to. The words hung between them, and something shifted. The space feeling less like a battleground and more like shared ground. Sebastian straightened, pulling another stack of files toward him. Then let's make sure everyone sees it now. Aria nodded, picking up her pen. They bent over the documents again, shoulders almost touching as they worked through the evidence. And for the first time since the auction, the silence between them didn't feel like a weapon. It felt like a truce. 1 week later, the conference room had become their war room. Coffee cups stacked in towers, documents covering every surface, and somewhere between day 3 and day 7, the space between Sebastian and Aria had shrunk from opposite sides of the table to working shoulder to shoulder. Aria reached for a file at the same moment Sebastian did, their hands colliding. Sorry. She pulled back, but not as quickly as she would have a week ago, and Sebastian slid the folder toward her in a quiet "go ahead," just as his phone lit up on the table, vibrating sharply against the wood. He answered in one quick motion. A beat later, a line formed between his brows, subtle but sharp, and Aria knew something was wrong. When, his voice came out flat. Silence as he listened. Did she say why? More silence. Longer this time. He ran a hand back through his hair, tension sharp. Find out who she talked to in the last 48 hours. Bank records, phone logs, everything. He ended the call and stared at the phone like it had just detonated in his hand. Aria straightened. What happened? Maria Valdez withdrew her testimony this morning. Aria's pen clattered onto the table, and she let out a tight, quiet breath. That's not possible. I spoke to her 3 days ago. She was ready. She wanted this. Someone got to her. Sebastian pushed his chair back and stood, pacing to the window. My father. Outside, sunlight spilled over the city bright and warm in a way that felt nothing like what churned inside him. Aria stood and moved beside him, close enough that their reflections overlapped in the glass. If she backs out, others will follow. I know. The investigation collapses. I know. She turned to face him, and he finally looked away from the window, their eyes meeting. So what do we do? Sebastian's hand lifted, almost touching her arm, then dropped. We find out what he threatened her with, and we make sure she knows we can protect her better than he can scare her. Aria held his gaze. And if we can't, then we fight harder. Something passed between them, a current that had been building all week, unspoken but undeniable. Aria drew a tense breath. This is going to get worse. Sebastian reached out and caught her forearm, just once, steady, grounding. Then he moved back to the table and started gathering files, his movements quick and precise. Then we move faster. Where are we going? To see Maria before they bury her completely. Arya grabbed her handbag. They walked out together, the documents left scattered behind them, like evidence of a war they were nowhere close to winning. 30 floors in silence. Sebastian stared at the numbers dropping. Arya watched his reflection in the polished doors. At floor 12, she drew a breath, fingers tightening on her bag strap. When this is over. The words thinned out. Sebastian's head turned a fraction, enough to say he'd heard. When this is over. What? Arya's grip tightened once more. Never mind. The elevator doors opened to the parking garage. They walked out, their steps echoing under cold lights. He pulled out the key and hit the unlock. And before opening the door, he turned. When this is over, his voice steady. We'll finish that sentence. Arya met his eyes across the roof of the car. Yeah, maybe we will. And as they pulled into traffic, a dark sedan several cars back eased into the same lane, keeping its distance. Maria's apartment sat on the 4th floor of a walk-up in Queens. The hallway narrow and dim, paint peeling near the baseboards. Sebastian knocked twice. Footsteps shuffled inside and went still as he said his name, and Arya moved closer to the door, sensing the hesitation on the other side. We're not here to pressure you. We just want you to know you have options. Through the gap under the door, a shadow shifted and stilled. Sebastian slid his card under the door and said, "This is my direct number. No assistants, no lawyers, no one in between." It vanished the next second, tugged out of sight. They waited through a long beat, the kind that stretched and said enough on its own. When nothing else moved behind the door, Sebastian exhaled once and started down the hall, Arya falling into step beside him. Traffic rushed past, horns blaring, the city moving too fast to care about two people standing on a cracked sidewalk. Arya's phone buzzed. She looked down, and her shoulders dropped. It's her. What does it say? Arya read aloud, her voice tight. They said they'd take my daughter's scholarship, cancel her financial aid, make sure no other school would accept her. I can't risk that. Please understand. Sebastian's fingers curled at his sides, nails pressing into his palms. They're not just coming after witnesses anymore. No, Arya said, pocketing her phone. They're coming after everyone connected to us. She looked up at him, and the weight of it settled between them like stone. Your employees, your investors, anyone who might stand with you. Sebastian scanned the street, the cars, the windows, the people walking past without a glance. We need to move the remaining witnesses somewhere safe. Where? Your father has reach everywhere. Hotels, safe houses. He'll find them. Then we go public first, Sebastian said. Before he can threaten anyone else, we take the evidence we have and we release it. All of it. Arya's eyes widened. If we do that without corroboration, we lose credibility, I know. But if we wait, we lose everything. A car slowed at the curb 20 feet away. Black sedan, tinted windows. Sebastian noticed it first, his body angling toward Arya instinctively. The car idled. Arya followed his gaze, her pulse spiking. Is that? The passenger window lowered an inch, just enough for someone inside to be watching. Then the car pulled away, merging back into traffic. Arya let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. They're following us now. Sebastian's voice came out steady, but something cold had settled in his chest. Good. Let them see where we're going. Where are we going? To my lawyer's office. We're filing a restraining order against my father. And we're putting every piece of evidence we have into a secure server, with instructions to release it automatically if anything happens to us. Arya stared at him. That's a declaration of war. Sebastian met her eyes. We've been at war since the shareholder meeting. We're just making it official. He offered a subtle tilt of his head toward his car, a wordless "after you." And when Arya stepped forward, Sebastian fell into stride beside her, matching her pace. Behind them, 2 blocks back, the black sedan reappeared. The next morning, 6 a.m. Sebastian hadn't slept. He'd spent the night at his lawyer's office filing restraining orders, uploading evidence to secure servers, building a fortress of legal protection that felt thinner with every passing hour. And now, back in his office with coffee gone cold on his desk, his assistant knocked twice and entered without waiting. Her face told him everything. "You need to see this." She set a tablet on his desk, the screen already glowing with headlines. Arya Castellano, mid-admission under review. Revenge-driven heiress accused of fabricating evidence. Knight Industries. Whistleblower's credibility in question. Sebastian scrolled through the articles, each one worse than the last. Photos of Arya at 15 paired with screenshots of allegedly falsified documents. Quotes from anonymous sources claiming she'd bought her way into MIT and spent years planning a vendetta that had nothing to do with truth. His throat tightened. "When did these go live?" 4 a.m., his assistant said quietly. "Every major outlet picked it up within an hour. The board is already calling for an emergency meeting." Sebastian grabbed his phone and dialed Arya. It rang once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th ring, she answered, and her voice came through steady but thinner than usual, like she was holding something back by sheer force of will. "I've seen it," she said. Sebastian leaned forward against his desk. "Where are you?" "Home." "Stay there," he said, already reaching for his coat. "I'm coming. Don't talk to anyone until I know what I'm doing, Sebastian." Her tone shifted, something defensive creeping in. "Arya, please," she said, and the word cracked just slightly at the edges. "Just come." He was already at the door. 20 minutes. The line went dead. She opened the door in comfortable clothes, her hair neatly pulled back, fully put together, but even makeup couldn't hide the exhaustion beneath her eyes. Sebastian stepped inside, and she closed the door behind him, leaning against it for a moment, like she needed the support. "They altered my MIT records," she said. "Made it look like my admission was flagged, like my thesis was questioned." Her voice stayed flat, controlled, but her fingers twisted together in front of her. "I have proof it's fake, but by the time we release it, the damage will be done. The board will shut everything down." Sebastian moved closer, stopping a few feet away. "Do the legal teams know?" "I sent them everything an hour ago, but it won't matter. People believe the first story." She turned away from him, walking to the windows, and the morning light falling across her face. 3 years, 8 months undercover. And he destroys it all in one night. Sebastian closed the distance. "We go public first," he said. "Hold a press conference. Show the original documents. Expose who paid for the fakes." "If I defend myself, it looks defensive," Arya replied. "If you defend me, it looks like you're protecting me." "Because—" She stopped, the words catching. "Because what?" She turned, and they were close now. Close enough for him to see the quick rise of her chest. "Because you're involved with me." Sebastian held her gaze. "And if I am?" Arya's breath hitched. "Are you?" He took one step closer, erasing the space between them until he felt the warmth radiating off her skin. "I'm standing here, when I could be protecting what's left of my company. What do you think?" Her lips parted, and for 3 full seconds, neither of them moved. The air between them charged with everything they hadn't said. Arya's phone buzzed, violent and loud. She flinched and crossed to the counter. "It's the legal team. They want me to step back until this is resolved." Sebastian followed, took the phone from her hand, and typed. "She's not going anywhere. We fight this together, or not at all. SK. He handed it back. Arya stared at the screen, then up at him. "Why are you doing this?" "Because it's right." His throat worked. And when he spoke again, his voice came out rougher. And because you matter. The words landed between them, simple and devastating. And Arya's eyes went wide, her defenses cracking in real time. Sebastian. His phone rang, cutting her off, the shrill sound breaking whatever had been about to happen. He glanced at the screen. The board, he said. I have 30 minutes to get there. Arya stepped back, creating space, rebuilding walls. Then you should go. Sebastian closed that space again with a single step. Come with me. She looked up at him, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. They'll tear me apart. Let them try, he said. I'm not walking into that room without you. Her eyes wavered for a moment, but Sebastian's steady gaze didn't move. Something in her expression settled, firming. Give me 5 minutes to change. Sebastian stood in the sunlight, his pulse racing from standing too close, from saying too much. When Arya emerged, she looked composed again, the same unshakable presence she'd carried into the boardroom. But when their eyes met, something steadier stirred beneath it. Ready? He asked. Ready. As the elevator doors closed behind them, neither noticed the photographer across the street, zoom lens trained on. Arya's windows, already uploading photos to the same outlets that had destroyed her credibility 6 hours earlier. The air in the boardroom was thick with tension as 9 directors sat in judgment. Sebastian stood at the head of the table, with Arya beside him, her spine straight, expression unreadable. The lead director cleared his throat. Mr. Knight, we're asking you to remove Ms. Castellano from the investigation until her credibility is restored. Sebastian's response came without hesitation. No. Then we have no choice but to call for a vote of no confidence in your leadership. Do it. Silence rippled through the room. Another director leaned forward, his voice measured. Sebastian, be reasonable. You're risking everything for the truth, Sebastian cut in, which is what you all claim to want. He looked around the table, meeting each director's eyes in turn. Arya Castellano spent 8 months in this company. She saw things none of you wanted to see. And now that it's inconvenient, you want her gone. He stepped forward. The allegations against her are fabricated. We have proof. But even if we didn't, I'd still stand by her. Because she's the only person in this room who's been honest from the start. The lead director's expression hardened. Then you leave us no choice. We'll convene the vote immediately. Fine. Sebastian turned to Arya, whose fingers had gone still against the table. Let's go. They walked out together, the door closing behind them with a finality that echoed down the empty hallway. Arya stopped 3 steps from the boardroom. You just lost your position. Sebastian kept walking. I know. She caught up, falling into step beside him. Why? He pressed the elevator button. Because some things matter more than a title. Her eyes searched his face, something unspoken passing between them. But before she could respond, his phone rang. He answered without checking the caller ID. We found something, his lawyer said. Harrison Knight wired $200,000 to the consultant who planted the stories. Sebastian stopped mid-stride, his free hand curling at his side. Can you prove it? I emailed everything, transfers, statements, all of it. Sebastian's eyes locked on Arya's. Send it to the board, too. Then he hung up. Arya's breath came out slow. We've got him. Sebastian's expression tightened, complicated but resolute. Then let's end this. The elevator doors opened, and they stepped inside. As the floor numbers descended, the space between them felt different now, charged with something that went beyond partnership, beyond alliance. At the ground floor, the doors opened to chaos. Reporters swarmed the lobby, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward. Mr. Knight, is it true you've been removed as CEO? Ms. Castellano, how do you respond to the fraud allegations? Sebastian took Arya's hand, his grip firm and deliberate, and pulled her through the crowd toward the exit. Outside, rain had started falling, and they stood on the steps as car doors slammed and more cameras appeared. Sebastian turned to Arya, still holding her hand. Press conference. Tomorrow. We release everything. She nodded, her fingers tightening around his. Everything. A reporter shouted something, flashes popping, but Sebastian lifted his free hand over Arya's head, shielding her from the rain as they descended the steps. He opened the rear door and moved her inside before the rain could reach her, then slipped in after her. The car pulled away, unhurried. Behind them, through the glass, phones lit the boardroom all at once. Directors stared at their screens, and the storm finally broke inside, too. Sebastian's apartment, late evening. The press conference was scheduled for 9 a.m., and the living room had transformed into a war room. Documents spread across every surface, laptops open, legal briefs stacked in precarious towers. Arya sat on the couch, reviewing the statement their lawyers had drafted, her pen scratching notes in the margins. Sebastian stood by the window, phone pressed to his ear. "No," he said quietly. "Keep it confidential until tomorrow morning." He ended the call and turned back. Arya looked up. "Who was that?" "Legal team. Final confirmation on the wire transfers." She nodded and returned to the document. Sebastian's phone buzzed again, and he glanced at the screen. Harrison. His father's name stared back at him, and something tightened in his chest. "I need to take this," he said, stepping toward the bedroom. Sebastian answered. "What do you want?" Harrison's voice came through cold and measured. "I want to make you an offer." "I'm not interested." "Hear me out," Harrison said. "You drop the criminal charges. I resign quietly. No trial, no publicity. The company survives intact." Sebastian's grip tightened on the phone. "And Arya? She gets what she wants. Accountability, reform, all of it. I'll even make a public apology. But we do this privately. No courtroom circus that destroys everything we've built." "You mean everything you built on lies?" Harrison's tone sharpened. "I mean everything that employs 3,000 people, Sebastian. Think about them before you burn it all down for revenge." "This isn't revenge. It's justice." "Justice," Harrison repeated, the word bitter. "You think putting me in prison fixes what's broken? You think a trial makes those women whole again?" Sebastian said nothing. "Let me walk away," Harrison continued, "and you can rebuild without the stain of a public scandal. You get to be the hero, I disappear, everyone wins, except the people you hurt. They'll be compensated, properly this time. I'll make sure of it." Sebastian stared at his reflection in the darkened window. "I need time to think." "You have until morning," Harrison said. "After that, the offer expires." The line went dead. Sebastian opened the bedroom door and found Arya standing 3 feet away, arms crossed, her expression carved from ice. "How long were you listening?" "Long enough." Her voice came out flat, controlled, but her eyes burned. "You're considering his offer." It wasn't a question. Sebastian stepped into the living room. "He's offering to resign, to compensate everyone, to walk away," Arya cut in. "No consequences, no accountability. Just make it disappear quietly, like he's always done." "It's not that simple." "Yes, it is," she said, stepping closer. "He hurts people. You hold him accountable. That's how justice works." "What about the 3,000 employees who lose their jobs if this company collapses in a public trial?" Arya's laugh came out sharp and humorless. "So you sacrifice truth to protect his empire. The same empire built on their suffering." "I'm trying to find a middle ground." "There is no middle ground," her voice rose. "There's accountability or there's nothing. You don't get to choose comfortable over right." Sebastian's frustration broke through. "I'm trying to protect what's left." "No," Arya said, her voice dropping to something colder. "You're trying to protect yourself from watching it all burn. That's not fair." "Fair?" she repeated, stepping back. "I spent 3 years buying stock, 8 months documenting abuse. I watched you fire me to save your company's reputation. And now you want to let him walk away because it's easier?" "I didn't say easier," I said. "I heard what you said," Arya cut in, grabbing her bag from the couch. "And I know exactly what you are." She headed for the door. Sebastian moved to block her path. "Where are you going?" "To finish this. With or without you." "Arya." She pushed past him, her shoulder grazing his, and yanked the door open. "I thought you were different," she said without turning back. "But you're just like the rest of them, protecting the system instead of the people it destroys." The door slammed behind her, the sound reverberating through the apartment like a gunshot. Sebastian stood alone in the wreckage of their partnership, surrounded by evidence they'd gathered together, statements they'd written together, a future they'd almost built together. His phone buzzed on the coffee table. Harrison. Tick-tock. Sebastian picked it up, stared at the message, then threw the phone across the room. It hit the wall and clattered to the floor. He'd made the wrong choice. Again. Arya's penthouse. Midnight. She sat at her dining table, the press conference statement glowing on her laptop screen, cursor blinking at the end of a paragraph she'd rewritten 4 times. The words were right. The evidence was airtight. But the empty chair across from her made every sentence feel incomplete. Focus. She pulled up the witness testimonies, cross-referenced them with the wire transfers, built her case brick by brick, the way she'd done alone for 3 years, before Sebastian Knight had ever mattered. Except now, he did. And that was the problem. She closed the laptop at 2 a.m., her eyes burning, and stood at the window overlooking the city. Somewhere out there, he was probably doing the same thing she was, preparing, strategizing, building walls instead of bridges. Tomorrow, she'd walk into that press conference alone, just like she'd planned from the beginning. So why did it feel like losing? Sebastian's apartment, 4 a.m. He hadn't slept. His laptop sat open on the coffee table, surrounded by printouts of Harrison's financial records, legal briefs, prosecutor communications, everything they'd need to bury his father in court. Everything Arya had worked 3 years to obtain, and he'd almost thrown it away for a clean exit. His phone sat next to the laptop, message thread with Arya still open. "I made a mistake. Let me explain." Read an hour ago. No response. He picked up the phone, typed another message, then deleted it character by character. Explanations wouldn't fix this. Only action would. He pulled up the press conference details. 9 a.m. at the Mandarin Oriental. Full media coverage. Arya Castellano listed as sole speaker. Sole, like he'd never been part of this at all. His chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with exhaustion and everything to do with the realization that he'd chosen wrong when it mattered most, prioritized comfort over truth, and lost the only person who'd ever made him want to be better. He stood, grabbed his keys, and headed for the door. The sun hadn't risen yet, but he wasn't waiting for permission anymore. Arya's penthouse, 6:30 a.m. She stood in front of her closet, staring at the navy suit she'd chosen for today. The armor she'd worn into every battle. She didn't need him there. She'd survived worse than this, alone. But as she pulled on the suit jacket and checked her reflection, the woman staring back looked ready for war, not victory. And somewhere beneath the armor, she felt the weight of fighting without the one person who'd proven he could stand beside her. Her phone buzzed. Just a message. "I'll be there." She stared at the screen, reading the 2 words 3 times, then set the phone down and finished getting ready. He'd be there. But whether that changed anything remained to be seen. The Mandarin Oriental Ballroom held 200 seats, and every one was filled. Cameras lined the back wall, their lenses trained on the podium where Arya stood reviewing her notes. The press conference set to begin in 10 minutes. Her legal team flanked her on the left, folders stacked precisely, ready to distribute evidence packets the moment she gave the signal. She looked calm, composed, but her thumb pressed against the edge of her notes hard enough to leave a crease. The back doors opened. Arya didn't look up, assuming it was another journalist finding their seat, until the murmur rippled through the crowd and heads turned. Sebastian Knight walked down the center aisle, suit pressed, tie straight, moving with the kind of certainty that came from knowing exactly where he belonged. And when he reached the front, he didn't take a seat. He walked straight to the podium. Arya's head snapped up, her carefully maintained composure cracking for half a second before she rebuilt it. "What are you doing here?" Her voice came out low enough that the microphones didn't catch it. Sebastian stopped 3 feet away. "What I should have done." The room had gone completely silent. Every reporter leaning forward, cameras adjusting focus. Arya's legal team exchanged glances, uncertain whether to intervene. Sebastian looked at Arya, only at Arya, like the 200 people watching them had ceased to exist. "I was wrong," he said, still quiet, still just for her. "I tried to find the easy way out because I was afraid of losing what was left. But the only thing worth keeping was standing right in front of me. And I almost lost that instead." Arya's fingers tightened on her notes. "This isn't the time." "Yes, it is," Sebastian said, stepping closer. "Because in about 8 minutes, you're going to stand up there and tell the truth about my father, about my company, about everything I was too blind to see. And I'm not letting you do that alone. I don't need you here." The words came out sharp, defensive, but her eyes betrayed something else. "I know," Sebastian said, his voice dropping lower. "You've never needed me. You did this on your own for 3 years. You would have finished it without me. But I'm asking anyway." He took one more step, close enough now that she had to tilt her head up to maintain eye contact. "Let me stand with you." Arya's breath caught, her defenses wavering. "Why should I?" "Because you matter more than my pride, more than my company, more than any deal I could have made to keep things comfortable. And I'm done choosing wrong." The ballroom felt like it was holding its breath. Arya stared at him, walls crumbling piece by piece. And when she spoke, her voice came out quieter than before. "You wanted to let him walk away." "I did," Sebastian admitted. "And that was the mistake. I thought protecting the company meant something, but it doesn't, not if it's built on silence." He glanced at the cameras, then back to her. "So I'm here, publicly, on record, to say you were right about everything. And whatever happens after this, we face it together." Arya's legal team leaned in, one of them whispering urgently, "Ms. Castellano, we need to start soon. The networks are waiting." Arya didn't move. Her eyes stayed locked on Sebastian's, searching for cracks, for signs that this was performance instead of truth. She found none. Finally, she nodded once. "Okay." Sebastian's shoulders dropped, relief flooding through him. "Okay?" She turned toward the podium, then paused. "But if you ever make a deal behind my back again, I'll bury you next to your father." Her tone was serious, but something almost like warmth flickered at the edges. Sebastian's mouth curved. "Fair." Arya stepped up to the microphone, and Sebastian moved to stand beside her. Not behind, not in front, but next to her as an equal. The cameras flashed. "Good morning," Arya began, her voice steady and clear. "I'm Arya Castellano, and for the past 8 months, I've been documenting systemic abuse at Knight Industries." She laid out the evidence piece by piece. Wire transfers, witness testimonies, recordings, each revelation, hitting harder than the last. And beside her, Sebastian stood silent but present, his presence confirming every word she spoke. When she finished, the room erupted in questions, hands shooting up, voices overlapping. "Ms. Castellano, what's your relationship with Mr. Knight? Are you pressing criminal charges against Harrison Knight? Will Knight Industries survive this?" Arya glanced at Sebastian, something unspoken passing between them. He leaned toward the microphone. "I'll answer that," he said, his voice cutting through the noise. "My father will face criminal charges. I've turned over all evidence to prosecutors. And as for Knight Industries, We're rebuilding from the ground up. He looked at Arya, with Ms. Castellano leading the way. More questions flew, but Arya stepped back from the podium, and Sebastian followed. They walked toward the side exit together, cameras tracking their movement. And as the door closed behind them, cutting off the chaos, they stood in the quiet hallway. Arya leaned against the wall, exhaling slowly. That was a lot, Sebastian finished. She looked at him, really looked at him, and the armor she'd worn into that room had started to slip. You meant it, she said. Not a question, a realization about standing together. Every word, even if it costs you everything, especially then. Arya's chest rose with a sharp breath, and for the first time since she'd walked out of his apartment, she let herself believe he might actually mean it. Then let's finish this, she said. Together? Together. Sebastian reached for her hand, and this time, she didn't pull away. Their fingers intertwined, and they stood there for 3 full seconds, neither moving, neither speaking, just existing in the space they'd almost destroyed. Then footsteps echoed down the hall, and reality came crashing back. We should go, Sebastian said. Where? Somewhere that isn't here. Arya smiled, small but real. Lead the way. They walked down the hallway hand in hand, and outside, rain had started falling again. The morning air felt cool against their skin as they stood under the awning, reporters still swarming inside. Sebastian turned to Arya. Did you eat breakfast? She blinked at the shift in conversation, from press conferences and criminal charges to something so mundane it almost felt absurd. No, he smiled, small and genuine. Did you sleep? Arya's exhaustion hit her all at once, the adrenaline from the press conference fading and leaving only the bone-deep tiredness of 3 sleepless nights. No. Sebastian's expression softened. Come on. Where? My place. I'll make you breakfast. Then you can actually sleep for a few hours. Arya hesitated, her instinct to refuse warring with the part of her that was too tired to fight anymore. You don't have to. I know, Sebastian said, but I'm asking anyway. She looked at him, standing there in the rain with his hair starting to curl from the dampness, offering something as simple as food and rest, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Okay. Sebastian's apartment, an hour later. Arya sat at the kitchen island, wrapped in one of Sebastian's sweaters. He'd handed it to her, telling her to get out of the suit and be comfortable. And she watched him move around the kitchen with surprising competence. Eggs sizzled in a pan, toast popped up golden, and coffee filled the air with warmth. I didn't know you cooked. Sebastian glanced over his shoulder. I don't, usually, but eggs are hard to mess up. He plated the food and set it in front of her. Scrambled eggs with herbs she couldn't identify. Toast with butter melting into the edges. Coffee in a mug that said, World's Okayest CEO. She picked up the mug, reading the text, and laughed for the first time in days. Gift from a friend, Sebastian said, sitting beside her with his own plate. They ate in comfortable silence, the kind that didn't need filling. And Arya realized this was the first time since the auction that they'd been together without the weight of what came next pressing down on them. Just 2 people eating breakfast. When she finished, Sebastian took her plate. Couch or bed? What? For sleeping, he clarified. Couch is closer. Bed is more comfortable. Arya's cheeks warmed slightly. Couch is fine. He grabbed a blanket from the closet and handed it to her. I'll be in the other room if you need anything. Sebastian. He turned back. Thank you. Something passed between them, softer than before, and he nodded once before disappearing into his office. Arya lay down on the couch, pulling the blanket up, and the last thing she registered before sleep took her was the faint sound of Sebastian's voice on a phone call, handling whatever came next so she didn't have to. Afternoon light streamed through the windows when Arya woke, warm and golden, painting the apartment in shades of amber. She sat up slowly, disoriented for a moment, then remembered where she was. Sebastian sat in the armchair across from her, laptop open, working quietly. And when he noticed her stirring, he closed it. How long was I out? 3 hours. Arya ran a hand through her hair, feeling more human than she had in days. Sebastian stood and walked to the kitchen. Coffee? Please. He returned with 2 mugs and handed her one. Then, instead of sitting in the chair, he sat on the couch beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. They sat in the sunlight, steam rising from their cups, and the silence stretched comfortable and warm. Finally, Sebastian spoke. I meant what I said earlier. Arya looked at him. Which part? All of it. But especially the part about you mattering more than anything else. He set his mug down on the coffee table and turned to face her fully. I don't know when it started. Maybe the rooftop. Maybe the first time you looked at me like I could be better than I was. But somewhere along the way, working beside you stopped being about the investigation and started being about you. Arya's breath caught. Sebastian, let me finish, he said gently, because I need to say this, and if I don't say it now, I might lose the nerve. He reached for her hand, and she let him take it. I love you, he said, the words simple and certain. Not because you saved my company, or exposed my father, or any of the things you did that were objectively incredible, but because you made me want to be someone worth standing next to. His thumb brushed across her knuckles. And I know I don't deserve another chance. I know I almost ruined this, but if there's any possibility. Arya leaned forward and kissed him. Soft at first, tentative, her free hand coming up to his face. And Sebastian froze for half a second before his brain caught up. And he kissed her back, his hand sliding into her hair, pulling her closer. The kiss deepened. 3 years of buried feelings and 3 days of separation crashing together. And when they finally broke apart, foreheads touching, both breathing hard, Arya whispered against his lips. I love you too. Sebastian's eyes opened, searching hers. Yeah? Yeah, she said. Even though you're infuriating, and you almost let your father walk away, and you made me want to strangle you at least 6 times. He smiled. Only 6? At least, she repeated. But somewhere in all of that, I fell in love with you anyway. And I hate that I did because it complicates everything. Good, Sebastian said, pulling her back in. I like complicated. He kissed her again, slower this time, deliberate. Like he was memorizing the shape of her mouth, the way she tasted like coffee, and something sweeter underneath. When they separated again, Arya's head rested against his shoulder, his arm wrapped around her, sunlight falling across them both. What happens now? She asked quietly. Now, Sebastian said, we finish what we started. We rebuild the company. We make sure Harrison faces consequences. And we do it together. And after that, he said, turning his head to press a kiss to her temple, we figure it out as we go. Arya smiled against his shirt. That's not much of a plan. It's the best one I've got. She tilted her head up, and their eyes met. Then I guess we're both winging it. Sebastian's smile widened, and he kissed her one more time, soft and brief and full of promise. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent to the 2 people wrapped in sunlight and each other. But inside Sebastian's apartment, time felt suspended, just for a moment, just long enough to catch their breath before the next battle. But for now, this was enough, more than enough. 6 months passed in courtrooms and conference rooms, in late nights and early mornings, in moments that rebuilt everything that had been broken. Harrison Knight sat behind the defense table in a gray suit, his expression carved from stone, as witness after witness took the stand. Maria Valdez spoke first, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Then 12 more women followed. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Sebastian watched from the gallery as his father was led away in handcuffs. And when Harrison turned back one last time, their eyes met across the courtroom. No words, just the weight of everything that could never be undone. Aria's hand found Sebastian's under the table, her fingers threading through his. He held on. Knight Industries transformed floor by floor, policy by policy. Anonymous reporting hotlines installed on every level. Independent oversight committees formed, with employee representatives. Aria stood at the head of the boardroom table, now officially co-CEO, presenting the new ethics framework to executives who'd once wanted her gone. Half of them had resigned. The other half stayed and listened. Sebastian sat beside her, and when she stumbled over a statistic, he caught it without her having to ask. Their partnership seamless in a way that only came from building something together from ruins. Conference room, 2 a.m. Sebastian's tie hung loose around his neck, Aria's heels discarded under the table, and they sat side by side, reviewing contractor bids for the renovated employee spaces. Aria's head dropped onto his shoulder, exhaustion finally winning. Sebastian smiled and kept working with one hand, the other wrapping around her. When they walked past the employee break room and someone called out, "Thank you, Miss Castellano." Aria paused, turned. A young woman stood there, one of the housekeeping staff who'd testified for everything. Aria's throat tightened, but she managed to smile. "Thank you for your courage." Sebastian's hand brushed the small of Aria's back as they continued walking, a quiet reminder that she hadn't done this alone. The same rooftop where they'd stood a year ago, when everything had been simpler and infinitely more complicated. Sebastian leaned against the railing, Aria beside him, their shoulders touching. "Think we'll make it?" she asked. "The company or us?" "Both." Sebastian turned his head, catching her profile against the fading light. "I think we already have." Aria looked at him, and something settled in her expression. Something that looked like peace. "Yeah," she said quietly. "I think so too." He took her hand, and they stood there as the sun disappeared below the skyline, painting everything gold. Behind them, the city stretched endless and indifferent. But up here, in this moment, they'd built something that mattered, something that would last. Sebastian and Aria rebuilt Knight Industries together, and sometimes the people who challenge us become the ones who save us. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done in Sebastian's position? Could you forgive someone who fired you? If you learned they did it to protect you, let me know below. And if you enjoyed this story, please consider liking and subscribing. It helps me create more stories like this one. Thank you for listening. Until next time.